What do you make of Texas wide receiver Brennan Eagle saying, I won't play another snap amid racial injustice? I mean, could you imagine just even back in February when the Super Bowl was going on, a player feeling not only saying these things, I mean, I would argue that he'd be ridiculed and, looked at as a pariah and a bad teammate, but now he's actually being supported by his head coach, Tom Herman. So I don't know. You can take that another Marvin Wilson standing up to his head coach, Mike Norvell at Florida State. You're seeing former Clemson players point out the N-word uses, the use of the N-word in 2017 at Clemson in a way that wasn't even disciplined by Dabo Swinney. You're seeing Dabo Swinney wearing a Football Matters shirt and shirt. I mean, knowing Dabo, he may have just worn that shirt and had it for years, but it certainly seems like the timing is suspect to say the least. You're seeing Iowa football players former players, James Daniels, the Chicago Bears, talking about the culture there. That's one of the few major programs where it is a majority white culture. So, I mean, just talk about how you and I come from a sports background, like how crazy it is. So people, it's easy to get jaded, pessimistic, but yeah, you're right. It's not the revolution. It's not like we're going to be having a society where militarism suddenly it stops, where suddenly we have programs of social uplift, where we take on the issues of corporatism and education, and healthcare is a human right for everybody. But this loss of the fear that is had players in straitjackets, especially in football, and we're highlighting football because of its. And let's be honest, it's the most popular sport in the United States, and I love football, basketball, baseball. But yeah, just what are your general thoughts about?
Well, kind of to my point, even when you were talking about Michael Jordan, I mean, even let's say Republicans buy sneakers, the rhetoric of him being apolitical. I mean, see what the movement has done. He made a pledge, whatever BS it means, and I don't know what that means, but he made a pledge to donate $100 million over 10 years to racial justice organizations. I mean, that shows that he's kind of the movement has made him sort of. And maybe from the documentary, he kind of sees his legacy compared to LeBron James. LeBron James being more of a social activist and taking more stances. Jordan always being kind of the apolitical person who just likes to make money. It was a funny story. Even a couple of years ago, I think there was a crisis in North Carolina. And there was a police shooting in which he was like, I'm going to give $1 million to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Right. I'm going to give $1 million to the International Chief of Association of Sheriffs. Benevolent Police Association. whatever the hell, man. We know what you're trying to say. Come on. That was his all sides type of compromise. But,
his all lives matter rhetoric.
All lives matter, whatever that means. But I think even as a black man, he still is an African American man, and I think even him, he can't not see the video of George Floyd being murdered. So I think that has an impact, and I think even his consciousness has changed, even as a multimillionaire. But back on even the players, coming from our background, I went to Jackson High School, named after one of the most racist, genocidal people ever walked this earth.
Well, and what about their rival high school where I used to coach, Robert E. Lee High School, whose statue is currently in the process of coming down in Richmond.
I never really considered Lee as a rival, but I know it's one of the oldest rivalries in the city.
They used to play on Thanksgiving Day every year.
Did they?
That's when they were all white schools, though, still. But let's not get into the weeds for our audience. Not
but even with Jackson, that was a majority African-American school. Our only white player was the kicker. Jeremy Federhall. Shout out.
That seems to be that's not an uncommon thing.
It's a theme.
Football, a theme, yeah.
But it actually was like football and going to these camps and stuff that actually met white people. And in college football at Weber International, I had to have my first white roommate, and that's when football was the experience of kind of learning about other people's cultures and learning about other nationalities and how they function. And yet we come together to play sports and under the same banner, be on the same team. So I think sports has that aspect of being uplift in terms of bringing people together. But also when it comes to, we could have never imagined taking political stances. Even with Marvin Wilson, the fact that head coach, Michael Gravel.
Marvin Wilson, star defensive tackle at Florida State University.
Who actually could have been a first-round pick last year, but decided to come back foolishly. Should have got that money. But he came back, and the coach was getting asked by, what was it, Tashawn Reed? Or it was a journalist asked him about, have you been responding to your players in regards to George Floyd?
Oh, yeah, Mike, they've had one-on-one meetings, heart to hearts about George Floyd, about racism, right?
Yeah, Mike Norvell said he's had one-on-one meetings individually, and then Marvin Wilson retweeted that and said that's bullshit, and he hasn't done that. And of course, the next day they had a team meeting where everything.
Yeah, but let's just pause. That stuff doesn't happen in college football. You talk about college football, some of the most controlled. Look, I'll be a personal anecdote. I was, very close to going into student-athlete player development, academic advising work, and even had gone to the University of Cincinnati and gone to a conference, kind of looked into it. And you hear so much. They talk about wanting to empower their players, but they're also terrified of the repercussions of, if a guy steps out of line, he's speaking and says something that might step on a corporate sponsor's toe. He might come out and say something that, makes the program projects a different image than what the program's trying to project. So the fact that we're seeing guys not only not be punished for that, but being praised now in this new kind of era that's emerged in the last few months with, COVID-19 and then George Floyd. I don't think we can overstate just how big of a deal that is in a shift, because I don't know, maybe you got a different take on that, but.
No, 100%. I think it's a huge deal. But also, Marvin Wilson is the best player on the team, so he can say that. Other players can't. Right. But I think we reach a point in which these coaches are under increased scrutiny. Recruiting is a lifeblood. How do you get these excellent athletes, mostly who tend to be African-American and Black, to come to your school and maximize their athletic ability to make as much money as you can off of it? That's the hustle of college football. These boosters act as these investors. They're essentially investors, capitalists who basically invest in these programs and get dividends off of the revenue that these programs create. These coaches, due to this climate, similar to the way you got these corporations that are having to put out these bullshit Black Lives Matter statements, even though, let's say, they don't probably treat their Black workers and pay them and give them.
Yeah, but it shows them the kind of pressure on there now. We know they're trying to co-opt stuff, right? We know they're going to try to co-opt.
It also shows the pressure on the coaches themselves, because they're trying to recruit these athletes and these Black kids to the college. And if one coach is not saying the right statement or saying or whatnot, best believe this other white coach is going to use that in recruitment against them. So these coaches are under increased scrutiny to really be on their P's and Q's in regards to race and racism, because their whole program can be sabotaged. Right. And one coach, if you have a coach, like, let's say, so we bring back to Dabo Swinney.
Let's go, please, man. Hey,
and Dabo Swinney, he's known as being, when all this stuff was popping up even a couple of years ago, he just called it, we don't have a race problem, we have a God problem.
A love problem, right? These sort of metaphysical type ideas that where we've lost our way kind of thing, right?
He's one of those right-wing televangel TV.
Right. If football would not have worked out, he would have been great, man, with Joel Osteen. He would have been a great passer. You imagine him and Joel Osteen together sharing the stage, man? They might have to get Reliant Stadium.
Yeah.
They already got the old Houston Rockets arena, turned it into a church. They might have to go get the football stadium next time and get Dabo in there. But I got a hot take on Dabo real quick, because honestly, I'm at a point now where, all right, I'm a little biased and fan perspective stuff, but it's not even about that for me. Dabo Swinney's really at the point now where he epitomizes everything that's wrong with college football. He's the guy that he truly is a believer in this notion of running his program like it's a fellowship of Christian athletes sort of deal. He goes in and look, you're in the deep South, and you got a lot of mothers, grandmas of kids he's recruiting that want to feel that they got a strong religious community there, because faith's really important to a lot of people he's recruiting. But I feel like he a long time has exploited that, and he's constantly, let's not forget the things he said about what if players knelt at Clemson, the kind of control. And I really think that house of cards is going to start coming down once other coaches, the negative recruiting. That's one thing people don't know in college football, is just how intense, and cutthroat this is, not just for the players, but these coaches and their families. They have the job, they make a lot of money, but you almost can't if it wasn't
like
that, who would want to live that lifestyle where you're year to year
at will,
you could potentially be out the door. That's potentially you will be out the door if the boosters don't, like what you're doing. So Dabo Swinney, I think, has got a big reckoning coming his way, and we'll see how that plays out and certainly track it. But it's bigger than just Clemson football. Right?
What kind of my point, and it's something that like a lot of white people do, especially college coaches who, let's say, are Christian. They tend to use Christianity and God as they use Christianity, God, as a means to shield them away from any criticism in regards to them doing a deeper dive analysis on race relations. And Dabo Swinney especially, like, for example, even with the COVID-19 crisis, when folks were kind of talking about, hey, we're not going to be playing games, he used that to be like, oh, God is, Christian, Bible, we're going to get through this, this kind of, optimism of sorts, which was rooted in, of course, his boosters, who for damn sure knew that they were going to play football because of these millions are not getting made. So, of course, that's like a political cover. In the same way, let's say a lot of the fascists in Brazil are also far-right Christians and use a lot of this scary rhetoric, the folks that support the president of Brazil.
Bolsonaro. And let's not forget, the people that support fascists. They support Bolsonaro, fascists. The people in Bolivia, the coup government there. There's a reason why these right-wing Christian fascist governments, like the one in Guatemala too, they align with countries like Israel because fundamentally there's an ideological nexus, right, of these kind of countries. And another episode we'll get to later, and we got to do this here soon, Mike, is getting on the sort of the whitewashing of apartheid trips that funded by Bob Kraft and others to bring NFL players and other NBA players to Israel, right? So we'll hit on that later. Yeah.
But the Dabo Swinney point, just to finish up, he got into a huge controversy over that, the optimism. And then he gets into a huge controversy even with his statement in regards to George Floyd, other coaches mentioning specifically racism.
Right.
And he kind of just absolves it with his like kind of pseudo-Christian rhetoric about, we're all, God's children.
And don't forget the Football Matters t-shirt.
So I was just about to mention that, the Football Matters t-shirt, in which, you got everybody's with Black Lives Matter. He wears a Football Matters shirt like a fucking dweeb. So like, I'm just happy.
I'm Dabo.
I'm happy he's getting the shit that he deserves.
Look,
because
I'm enjoying it.
Because he's totally full of shit.
And the fraud he built, I hope it's going to be coming down because it's about time. One thing, you mentioned something with Jordan real quick. I just couldn't help but think about the parallel now. To think about the times and how activism works. A lot of people get pessimistic. Someone like Jordan, look, I bet he was affected by George Floyd, but let's not forget, this happened to Rodney King back in L.A. in 91, and it was on film. And you had Craig Hodges, who I got his picture up there behind me, who's a hero of mine. I've gotten to know him, read about him more here recently, pressing him. We got to do something. The Rodney King thing was just an outrage. What does Jordan say? Oh, I don't really know that much about it. I don't know enough about the facts. I can't really say anything because there wasn't the pressure. Hodges was out on an island on his own. He didn't have the movement backing. So now you're seeing with the movement backing, you're seeing the mass people coming to the streets. Sure, you're going to have Democratic Party people, liberals try to co-opt it, turn it into something that's not, have cops kneeling. But the stuff, while I was pessimistic for a few days, seeing I'm up here in Washington, D.C. right now, and I have been for the last couple of weeks, and seeing the ebb and flow of the protest movement there, I think maybe I was a little too pessimistic because in D.C. there's a huge sort of like liberal NGO apparatus, and it's like it's maybe a special thing that doesn't really reflect the whole nation. When I saw what y'all did down in Jacksonville, that really showed me in other places around the country too that the militancy is there. But someone like Jordan, I bet he was affected. We don't know what's in his heart, but there's a big difference. In 1991, he's not going to speak out on Rodney King, even though there's video, right? And he's got his teammate, Craig Hodges, imploring him to. But yet now, because we've seen the space that's been created where he realizes it's a legacy thing and that his legacy is actually going to be tarred by that, even though early in his career, he thought the opposite, that by speaking up was going to be the problem. So that's right there for people that are losing hope, for people that feel like maybe things are not where we need to be, and that a lot of this stuff is being co-opted. And you see that clown of a sheriff up in Flint, Michigan, talking about this cop hurts people. We're going to turn this protest into a parade. Yeah. And my colleague at the Gray Zone, Anya Parenfeld, did a great piece recently, just totally blowing the lid off the fraud that guy is, making money off every phone call going in and out of the jail there in Flint, Michigan, a town that's dealt with enormous problems. And well, just keep your eye out for Sheriff Chris Swanson. This guy's going to be trying to capitalize off that. So, but we know that's going to happen. So I think that shows the power of some of the stuff we've seen. And people like Mike that have been organizing in the streets, built long-standing relationships with people, deserve a lot of the credit for that. But anything else you want to hit on with any of those? I mean, like the Iowa football one was also the fact there's so many of these things. I mean, the Texas wide receiver basically said, unless these things were addressed, he's not going to play. That would have been just dismissed out of hand. You're seeing at Iowa football, former players, James Daniels, I made reference earlier from the Chicago Bears offensive lineman, talking about they got their strength and conditioning coach on administrative leave now. And Mike, you know this, like as well, strength and conditioning coaches in college football are as important as anyone, because they can be with the players year round, but the other coaches can't be. And Iowa has this tradition of a really strong strength program. And players talked about like guys coming up, putting them down. But you got tattoos, you got to try to escape almost your identity, run away, and almost forcing this idea of like assimilation. And if you don't assimilate, you're just going to be back in the hood and your life's not going anywhere. And people are finally coming to a point where, it's not okay to say it. And there's going to be a price to pay. And I think that shows the power that's being built. And you can take it any direction you want.
I think it's similar with like a lot of football teams and this rhetoric and kind of, especially racist rhetoric you hear from some coaches who are trying to morph these young boys into men. It's really a means to establish discipline. And that's what I think that's essentially a racist sort of discipline. Is no different than in the military. When, I have friends and stuff who try to join the army and they're like drill sergeant says racist shit and they respond and they get kicked out of the army. It's very similar, especially in regards to the rhetoric. So I think you're seeing a different society with no tolerance for that type of bullshit. People are fucking done with this coach who can say all this racist shit and get away with it. That's not going to happen anymore. And these coaches are going to have to adapt to that shit, because traditionally football has been kind of this place where it's kind of the coaches who mostly tend to be white, especially at the college level. It's an implied like, I coach black kids.
Well, it's a fatherly type thing, right?
A fatherly type of thing. When they recruit, then there's the racial dynamics with that occurs. And I think that's something that is changing and shifting, because the black players are getting more conscious of who they are, what their race is, what class they're in, and they're using their voice to really speak out. And that even kind of brings me to with the Drew Brees situation. Drew Brees is a star NFL quarterback, future Hall of Fame quarterback, who made comments in regards to was asked an interview question about potential protests with people kneeling. And as a result of that, he replied, of course, the brand, 2 years ago, the same bullshit. My grandfather in the military, we shouldn't kneel. He got so much fucking visceral reaction from that. He got reaction from Cam Jordan, a star defensive end. He got a visceral reaction from his star wide receiver, Michael Thomas.
What about Alvin Kamara? His star running back.
And even Alvin Kamara went into a deeper dive about how it is to be a black person in America and went on more interviews. So Drew Brees had to back down and he had to apologize for that. And then Trump, like an idiot he is or whatever, he tries to bring this issue back up, makes a tweet, I support Drew Brees and his right to, support the flag, blah, blah, bullshit. If this was 2 years ago, that may have worked. But what happened was even Drew Brees had to repudiate Trump tweeting at him and said, we have to listen to the black community and fight racial justice. So seeing a shift in the material conditions of society, that racist rhetoric publicly isn't being allowed in all spaces.
Well, Mike,
not immune to it.
Mike, what about, whoever thought in recent times we would see President Trump going off on Roger Goodell in the NFL for potentially saying that his crazy tweet he brought out last night. We can show it up on the screen here while we're doing this, and you can take a look. But it's like, it shows how unhinged he is. He's Goodell of all people feels in the NFL. Let's get one thing straight. NFL's never going to just do the right thing to do the right thing. They're a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, right? They have relationships with their ownership. The 32 owners are very much connected to some of the most insidious, enterprises in this country, from, like the coal and oil and military industrial complex and private prisons all the way down the line. He's not coming out saying that unless he's got pressure on him, unless he's got that kind of, that he's making the calculation that if he doesn't do it, there's a bigger price to pay. And now he's got Trump coming at him, basically accusing him of saying it's okay to kind of restart this movement. So real quick, we're going to play about a 1-minute clip of like a lot of these players' reaction that was not sanctioned by the NFL. And it's ironic that then Roger Goodell quotes these players, some of them including Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, Odell Beckham Jr., Tyrann Mathieu, and others. He quotes them most directly in his statement, and where they're all talking about, without the shield, as Desmond Howard points out, without the NFL logo, the need to fundamentally change and transform. So let's listen real quick, and then we'll react.
It's been 10 days since George Floyd was brutally murdered.
How many times do we need to ask you to listen to your players?
What will it take
for one of us to be murdered by police brutality?
What if I was George Floyd?
If I was George Floyd?
What if I was George Floyd?
If I was George Floyd?
If I was George Floyd? If I was George Floyd?
I am George Floyd.
I am Breonna Taylor.
I am Ahmaud Arbery.
I am Eric Garner.
I am Laquan McDonald.
I am Tamir Rice.
I am Trayvon Martin.
I am Walter Scott.
I am Michael Brown Jr.
I am Samuel Du Bois.
I am Frank Smart.
I'm Philip White.
I am Jordan Baker.
We will not be silenced.
We assert our right
to peacefully protest.
It shouldn't take this long to admit.
So, on behalf of the National Football League,
this is what we, the players,
would like to hear you state.
We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people.
We, the National Football League,
admit wrong and silencing our players from peacefully protesting.
We, the National Football League,
believe Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Mike, what do you make of just hearing from the NFL players and then hearing the power of that message is so powerful that then Roger Goodell feels like he's got to actually adopt it, say that he stands in solidarity, and make a statement to the point where he knows doing that is going to alienate and make the president mad who he has a good relationship with, yet he still feels like he's got to make that calculation. What kind of power does that show?
It shows a strong power, especially in regards to the workforce. The NFL players are the workforce. I mean, you may see them as millionaires, people making $100,000 of dollars, but their boss is making billions. So
right.
There's an exploitation of labor that occurs. So these players are starting to identify themselves, of course. I'm sure everyone knows they're black, but they identify themselves with the cause that is, like, say, black freedom, the black freedom struggle. Right. And they're also identifying the power that they have as the players, as the voice, in order to use that platform to advance an agenda that's going to benefit them, but also other black people.
Right.
And I think that consciousness is something that we're seeing in all over the country. There's no coincidence that, a lot of these corporations are saying the same bullshit rhetoric about that we support Black Lives Matter, et cetera, because they know with their consumers, they have to make it, they can't seem like a racist company because they lose a lot of money. They also know that they can't seem like a racist company, at least superficially, even though folks know a lot of these companies, 99% of them have a lot of racist policies in regards to the black workforce or, other people of color.
Or other just terrible policies. I mean, let's just, like you mentioned,
terrible policies in general. Right. Yeah, terrible policies in general. But like I was saying, they know that they have to at least show their workforce that, or their labor pool, that, hey, we're not racist like any of these other companies are racist. So you can't view the NFL outside of the vacuum of itself being
right. So
a conglomeration of corporations that exist, and the head of that corporation, the guy who serves the interests of these ruling class billionaires, is Roger Goodell. So he has to take a stance that is fundamentally speaks out against racism. Notice he didn't speak out against police violence, though.
Notice he didn't mention Colin Kaepernick's name by name either. So very.
And here's the thing. Even with a lot of these company statements, they're talking about racism and Black Lives Matter. They're not talking about killer cops.
No,
no. They're avoiding that like the plague. And I think that's the next step that, the grassroots is going to have to push everybody on because, Like what the like they're making it, and it kind of leads to the point of even with the George Floyd's case and the kind of the reaction you're seeing from the country, but even especially from the liberals, conservatives, whatever, is they're trying to make it into an individual case of a racist police officer.
Right.
And this officer was just so racist, and we got to get rid of these bad racist officers.
The bad apples.
Racism.
Right?
Racism is, and it is racism, but it's also the police is an institution of class oppression.
Right.
And the class that controls the police, which is white supremacist ruling class, is carrying out that oppression through the police force. So these laws that were passed, the police are carrying that out. Mass incarceration, the police are the first people that people see when it comes to going to jail. It's the cops first. So you can't discount that. We need total institutional community control of the police, or empowerment of the people over the police to really see an effect. So I'm loving these companies talking about racism and wanting to get rid of it. Great. Yeah. But let's deal with the cops, because they still have guns and they still have the ability to kill people. So it's not just one individual person who's a bad cop who's killing people and he's racist and we need to do better screenings. No, it's the institution that breeds this. It's the institution. We have a criminal injustice system that's institutionally and criminalizing, passing legislation that is targeting oppressed nationalities in this country. So that's the problem. It's not an individual solution of one individual officer or one racist act. It's an institutional problem that produces racism and white supremacy and carries this out to its final end, which is the death of George Floyd or the death of Ahmaud Arbery.
Right. And so many others whose names are anonymous.
So many others,
because they shouldn't be, and we should be saying all of them. I know we could go on and on. Eric Gardner, who people know about in Staten Island, but we could go on the list. But we got to keep it moving real quick. I want to play a clip right here, and then we'll react. It's a little bit of Desmond Howard, Mike Greenberg, and then quickly from Jalen Rose. I especially like this Desmond Howard clip because you look behind him, you'll see Paul Robeson, who I want to do an episode with us coming up here soon on who Robeson is and why I think he is the most powerful human being really in the 20th century. At American culture. But he's got the nice record, Paul Robeson, Songs of My People, to side note. But more importantly, just to sort of get a reaction of where people in mainstream and sports are coming from. Before we play it, I want to kind of point out, think about how the people like Stephen A. Smith, these mainstream pundits, how they're reacting now and trying to triangulate their positions, realizing that they don't want to be stuck in this box with being like a Jason Whitlock or being someone who's now that's not in, right? That's been something that's been so. You're seeing even Stephen A. Smith start to ramp the rhetoric up. You're starting to see. So, look, people have different motivations, and we can know that. But we can still, understand that the fact that people who are motivated primarily by the bottom line as opposed to just the principle of it and the fighting for justice and the desire to overcome, not just overcome, but defeat these systems of oppression, if they're speaking on these things and becoming more militant in their rhetoric and on a daily basis and calling people out, it's showing that there's a serious dynamism to what's happening now. There's change in the air, and we don't know where it's going to go, but it's going to require organization, it's going to require discipline, and it's going to require people developing and being willing to further their political education. So let's hear real quick about Desmond Howard's take. He was the former Super Bowl 31 MVP with the Green Bay Packers and Heisman Trophy winner from the University of Michigan, then NBA star Jalen Rose, and we'll react on the backside of it.
I have to say that I was actually looking for some NFL insignia. I was looking for the shield, which didn't come up once. I noticed that they were all dressed in civilian clothes. No one had on the jersey because the jersey has the NFL logo on it too. So what they're doing is tremendous, but I want to make sure that they keep going forward with that movement and that they also hold the NFL accountable. Make the NFL, Roger Goodell, them get behind their movement so their voices can be heard even louder. Great start for those young men, but they need to make sure that the NFL and Roger Goodell, who I believe owes Colin Kaepernick an apology, that they get behind this movement also.
It felt to me as I was watching it, Jalen, as though they were demanding action. It is one thing to say the right things. And it is another thing to actually do meaningful things. Now, I do not want to shortchange the fact that many teams in the National Football League have taken meaningful action financially and beyond that in the 4 or 5 years that we have been talking about here. But it sounds to me like these players are saying once and for all, people need to start doing stuff. The time for talking about it is over, Jalen. The time to actually start doing things has arrived.
Because if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And look at the sports dynamic. The NFL has represented itself as the shield and not necessarily marketed its players. It's actually marginalized its players. They have restrictions after high school. They have a salary cap. They don't have guaranteed contracts. They just lost, in a lot of people's opinion, their most recent negotiations with the NFL. And so even though we are the labor on the field, we're not in ownership, not many GMs or presidents, very few coaches, but we're allowed to be the entertainment and the labor. And so if they continue to carry this message that we're bigger than the score of the game, that could be a powerful domino as it continues to fall.
All right, so we're back. There's a lot to dive into there, and I want to break it down into 3 things. We have what Desmond Howard says at the beginning, we have Mike Greenberg, and we have what Jalen Rose says. I'll take real quick Desmond Howard's thing, and then I'll let Mike hop in on Jalen Rose or Mike Greenberg. We can both kind of hit on that. But Desmond Howard makes a point. This was recorded before Roger Goodell made that statement. And what he's responding to is the player message from Patrick Mahomes, Tyrann Mathieu, Odell Beckham, Ezekiel Elliott, a number of the players we mentioned earlier. And he's saying there wasn't an NFL shield. I want to see Roger Goodell actually come out and take action. That was a few days ago, all right, 3 days ago, I think, to be precise. And now we're actually seeing that that's exactly what's happened, right? So pressure works. Activism works. And this is like just – and if this is happening in mainstream, media, ESPN, which is owned by Walt Disney, that's not even going to – we know that's not going to be some kind of militant rhetoric. So we know that that's not – the masses are already ahead of this, right? And people in the streets understand this better. And now we're getting the system, the establishment, having to react and find a way to try to make sure they don't get left behind and look like they're on the wrong side of history. With Mike Greenberg, he's talking straight up about concrete action. Mike Greenberg is, I always thought, like this nerdy little ESPN commentator. He used to be on Mike and Mike. And Mike, you remember that, right? They always kind of made that theme about the nerdy little Mike Greenberg with the jock, juxtaposed with the jock Mike Golick. And so Greenberg's like, we need concrete action. It sounds like they're making demands. I mean, I don't know, man. You go ahead and speak for yourself. And then Jalen Rose talking about we're the labor on the field, right? And I don't know.
I think it goes to the entire point we've been saying: the empowerment of the players, the ability and the strength that these players have in regards to taking action, in regards to even pressuring those above them to take action, and the fact that they're maximizing the political climate that we're in now to really use their voice and establish a precedence in which they can use it in their future. Without what was happening in the grassroots, they wouldn't have the same ability to do that. But I think what as we've said throughout this podcast is that the fact that there's a heightened movement out there that's giving these players the political cover to take these more drastic chances and take these more drastic stances, not necessarily drastic, but a stance that they normally wouldn't take.
Right, drastic in comparison to the standards we've been used to, sadly.
Yeah, 100%. And they would really take that and maximize it. And also force the ownership, force the bosses, really, their bosses to take a similar stance and make them actually, do something.
Right.
And not that it's like these owners making a bullshit statement saying they support Black Lives Matter is doing something, but it's making racist people uncomfortable. And I think that's always a goal.
And that's no small thing. I mean,
that's not a small. So if the racists
sharpens the contradictions
and Trump are getting upset, it's usually a positive thing, except when it comes to Russiagate. But
except when it comes to Russiagate, right? Yeah.
It's usually a positive thing, and I think we should support that, and I think we should move forward with it.
All right. Well, cool. I think we're getting near the end. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. We're going to be doing a lot of these going forward, and I mentioned some of the issues we want to continue to hit on, and we'd love to have listener feedback. I'm here, been broadcasting tonight from Washington, D.C. I live up in the New York City area now. As I've mentioned, though, I'm from Jacksonville, Florida originally. Anyways, Mike Sampson's down there doing great work in Jacksonville, Florida. Mike, why don't you tell people how they can hit you up on Twitter and kind of like your background and how to get a hold of you and kind of, just what you're doing going forward a little bit.
You can find me on Facebook, Michael Sampson II. That's 2 I's. But also organization. I'm organizer with Jacksonville Community Action Committee. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Find out what we're up to. I'm also on Twitter at Brother Flourish and on Instagram at Mike Flourish. So I'm actually banned on Twitter for a couple of days. Which why I know, Nate, you've been tweeting at me. I can't respond.
Oh, all right. Did you offended the Twitter gods?
Yeah, I called a famous female Black rapper who said some anti-Black stuff. I call her a certain expletive. That
props on you, man. Hey, you're mixing things up, so that's what we want to do.
And the expletive is not like a misogynist. I call her the C word for that Black people can call other Black people if they're being racist. Find me on there.
All right, I got you, man. I appreciate it. So, Mike's down in Jacksonville. I'm here in Washington, D.C., coming at you where Dan Snyder of the Washington football team, we'll keep it politically correct tonight, has yet to issue any kind of statement still, and is probably hiding out in his mansion somewhere along the Potomac River. But we'll see if he emerges at some time here and recognizes that maybe even his team is one of the most backwards reactionary teams in the NFL, has to come out and do something. So we'll see how that evolves, and if players, here in the District of Columbia that play play for Washington, if they're going to feel comfortable, speaking up and having the same backing maybe of other teams. Is there going to be a difference between what team you're on and the kind of support you're going to get? And I think that's going to be interesting to see that going forward, because we could see a real isolation of certain owners that continue to try to punish players and whatnot. So it'll be cool to kind of see how this plays out. I'm excited, honestly. This has been a tough time. People are struggling. I don't want to make, it's a devastating time for a lot of folks. But with change, there comes the possibility for transformation. And I firmly believe that, in looking at sports and recognizing that whether you like it or not, ignoring the power that the ruling class itself is put in sports is that you do it at your own peril, because they have developed sports as a way to market American soft power to the world and show America that from the lens they want. But just like when factory owners and, the Industrial Revolution, they brought in all these peasants to the cities and developed a new emerging proletariat working class, you have to have labor to make that happen, right? And you can't just always control that and force them to kind of – so there's a great subversive opportunity, and a lot of people hear subversive and they might think like, oh, that's wrong. But no, people need to subvert from within. People need to. That's how power dynamics change. Power is not a dirty word; it exists. It's about who holds power. So we're going to look to continue to analyze power, analyze sports, analyze politics, and love to hear feedback from everybody else. You can hit me up on Twitter at Nate Wallace 9, the number 9, and on Instagram at Wallace_Nate. Next time I'll probably be coming from you up in either New York City or Jersey City where I live. And Mike, continue to look forward to it and keep doing what you're doing down there. So we'll go ahead and sign off for tonight, and y'all keep fighting. All right. Take care.